Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Vanilla Furniture Expanded Security. For starters, you'll need the additional workshop content, Vanilla Expanded Framework, and Harmony. A nice easy one to cover today. If you like keeping your mod list pretty trim and want things to do exactly what they say on the box, this contains a helpful, condensed handful of turrets and defensive options to expand upon your vanilla options, without flooding your architect menu or research tab and keeping everything pretty well balanced. First things first, there's a little bit of interconnectivity with this mod. If you're using Biotech, Anomaly, or Vanilla Weapons Expanded Non-Lethal, you're going to get one extra turret from each of them. Secondly, if you used to use this mod in its version 1 state, you may notice a few of the parts are missing. The decoy, sentry turret, EMP cannon, and the architect shield generator didn't survive the chopping block. Whilst I don't have a lot of experience with those four specifically, I do remember being able to abuse the crap out of the AI with decoys. Going out on a limb here, I'm going to assume the reason they didn't come back for version 2 is likely to do with balancing issues. Anyway, no mod options to cover for this, so we're just going to go project by project. Some of these are added to existing research options and others have their own entirely new project created. We'll kick things off by going with the research of choice for medieval themed colonies. Siege equipment will unlock you 3 new low-tech options. Cavalry spikes are extremely accessible if you live in a forest biome, but they'll get pretty damn expensive to replenish if you're struggling for trees. Unlike the majority of other traps in the game, these can be placed right next to each other, making an entire path dangerous to advance through. They aren't going to go off as soon as the first target brushes against them, however, as that 100% trigger chance can be mitigated, seemingly not just by the nimble trait either, leading to certain enemies successfully leapfrogging entire rows of spikes at a time. Just like the trap though, once these have been triggered, they're done. The entire thing will disappear. You also have 2 manned turret options with this tech, the Ballista and Catapult, both of which can have a foundation built of either stone or wood. You're going to have significantly more healthy defenses if you opt for something like granite instead of using pyromaniac bait. The Ballista is the smaller of the 2. Strong and accurate enough to bring down a fully grown dragon in just a few bolts, unless the plot armor says otherwise or the writers just kind of forget about it. Security options like these will be outranging even late game sniper rifles, with a surprisingly fast turnaround on aiming and reloading. Whilst they can fire up to 86 tiles away, you're going to find that they operate best at a medium to short range due to the accuracy fall off. You'll also want to be a little bit careful about just throwing shots away with this thing willy-nilly. It only holds 4 bolts and it takes 5 wood per shot to reload, making it capable of rapidly burning through your stockpile if you're living outside of that forested biome. As well as doing pretty decent damage on direct hits, the impact from the bolt crashing into the ground is strong enough to cause wounds to those caught around the immediate area, as shrapnel and splinters will explode outwards. The Catapult is the bigger option here, taking considerably more floor space, requiring more materials to build, and launching a chunk of stone rather than using simple wooden projectiles. This will need reloading with a fresh stone after every single shot, with its aiming time still taking over 5 seconds to line up a shot accurately. Well, as accurately as it can. Its range is basically tile wide though, and it counts as a high projectile compared to the Ballista, which needs a direct line of sight to the target. This means your catapult can be safely constructed within your perimeter walls and launch its projectiles out to try and splatter the enemy. Just like the ballista bolt, a huge rock being thrown at high velocity tends to create a significant impact upon landing, causing damage to those stood around the impact zone too. You might have also picked up the bear trap from researching complex furniture during your medieval adventure. This operates in a similar way to your normal spike traps, only it's sacrificing some of its damage and armor penetration for the upside of being reusable. So whilst you're paying a little bit more at the outset, you can stagger these down your kill corridor and they'll stay there until a raider decides to bring explosives, or you get bored of rearming them and decide to repurpose the material into something else. Due to how material offsets work on percentile based improvements, using something like plasteel or bioferrite is going to do very little to improve the traps, for an extra, somewhat costly investment. Let's hop forward now and move into tech after electricity has been researched. With IEDs, you're also going to unlock the landmine and the shock mine. The landmine is comparable to your standard high explosive IED, with it costing an additional component for the upside of having both a far larger blast radius and detonating immediately upon being triggered, rather than fusing. If you're a player that enjoys making use of these explosive traps, you're going to get the most bang for your buck using a landmine, with a single one covering more than double the tiles of a normal IED. The shock mine is actually reusable, with it detonating a large EMP burst upon being triggered that will cause burns to humanoids and stun any mechanoids for a considerable duration, making this something you want in your kill box to lock down targets, rather than a trap that you're going to place in a corridor, as you're unlikely to be able to make effective use of that lockdown time if enemies are bunched up in a hallway. Costing just one normal and one advanced component, these aren't ridiculously expensive to construct either. Just a couple of them placed in pathing hotspots can stop mechanoids like Scythers or Scorchers running up to your front line and causing any problems. The cooldown once this is fired is around 3 minutes or so, and you need to be aware that missed shots can hit the shock mine itself and potentially destroy it, with it being quite a delicate piece of kit. Next is a simple unlock that you can grab from Gunsmithing, the ammo box. You don't need to panic, ammo mechanics aren't arriving in the VE universe with this inclusion, it's just a simple buff totem that provides reload speed to adjacent colonists, at the risk of it being hit by a stray or intentional shot that causes a large explosion, injuring any that are nearby trying to make use of it. You can see this buff in effect by checking the reload speed on the equipped weapon screen, showing that it's reducing weapon reload to 80%. As always, check your weapons to see which of the stats they're leaning more heavily on and if they actually benefit that much from this effect. Some will have a large wind up but a very quick reload, others will aim very rapidly but take a long time to rearm. Those are the kind of guns that you want to use by an ammo box. Now we hop over to something a little bit different, the artillery and auto mortar that come from the Mortars research. The artillery is a pretty serious bit of kit, costing twice as many components as a vanilla mortar. For that additional investment, you're getting a greater direct hit chance and a far smaller miss radius, making the artillery a precision strike device, whereas the mortar is more for saturation fire in a wide area. Not only will you find it more accurate, it's large enough to be manned by 2 colonists at once, which is going to double its firing speed by halving the cooldown between shots. Just like a normal mortar, this is using your shell of choice, and it's going to need a fresh barrel after it's fired 20 rounds. The last upside to the artillery over a mortar is that this can provide support fire up to 12 tiles away from your home base, on any world site that you're currently present at, making missions to raid enemy work sites and the like especially easy, as you can just nuke them as soon as you arrive and scoop up whatever goodies are left. The auto mortar will also require microelectronics, but it's listed in this tech, so let's cover it now. To compensate for this not needing an operator, you are limited to firing HE shells from it, with it needing advanced components rather than standard ones to build. This also needs quite a lot more attention on the part of the player, if you're going to use a lot of them, as these will quite happily attempt to bombard enemies stood right next to your own colonists in melee if you didn't tell them to hold fire. Whilst they do have quite a long aiming time at 18 seconds per shot, they're capable of storing up to 5 shells at once and don't need an operator to run back and forth to reload and recalibrate. So with just 2 or 3 auto mortars, you're perfectly capable of ruining basically any raid that doesn't immediately charge to attack you. On from the mortar tech, we have trench warfare. Let's dig into it.
Boo! You suck!
You're going to get a few parts with this to add a little verticality to your combat setup, without actually having to mess around with Z levels at all. These are the dugout, trench and platform. The dugout and trench both provide the same bonuses and penalties, with the main difference being that the dugout is faster to build, uglier and more easily collapsed by nearby explosions, A single grenade is going to be enough to instantly remove a dugout section, causing the nearby ground to resettle and fill in the hole. Trenches can be built out of any material, but understandably get the most benefit from something like stone, with it taking considerably longer to build. A trench line is going to be a significant time investment to make with a sturdy material, but it won't instantly collapse from a single explosive. Entering or exiting the trench will take a long time, making the targets vulnerable as they need to ascend or descend its walls. Once inside a trench or a dugout, targets receive a 30% evasion buff against ranged attacks, halve any explosive damage taken as they can duck and cover, but they sacrifice some of their weapon's range due to the lowered firing position, reducing max range down to 70%. You can still use a mounted weapon in an entrenchment, allowing you to get around the penalty and providing the additional defense on your operator, so always consider placing a dugout, at the very least, in the interaction spot for any gun complexes that you've built. The platform is the opposite approach to entrenching yourself. Instead, you're taking an elevated position to provide greater vantage, which will increase weapon range by 30% at the cost of making the user more susceptible to range fire. This has the same slowed movement when you're climbing or descending it, just like a trench. Obviously, it's exceptionally useful for things like a sniper or a charge lance, and whilst it might seem counterintuitive, barricades and sandbags will still help a colonist mounting these positions and provide cover. They won't get any meaningful bonuses if mounting a gun from a platform, however, so think trenches for static guns and platforms for your own weapons when possible, with reinforcing defences placed around both of them to provide the best cover bonus. You also get razor wire here too. This acts the same way as a fence, mechanically, with the upside being that any raiders trying to clamber over it will potentially take stab wounds. Again, it's another trap that has such low values that building it out of more exotic or expensive materials doesn't provide enough benefit to justify that cost. Steel will work just fine. This won't be broken upon being triggered like cavalry spikes, so building lines out of razor wire to deter raiders can be a fairly solid investment. Just be aware that raiders will always look for the path of least resistance, and these slow movement quite considerably. So if you leave a space open for your own colonists to path through, don't be surprised when enemies gravitate towards that and ignore stepping over the other sections entirely. These can be especially useful around choke points and corners to prevent enemies hugging tall walls for cover, whilst providing no cover of their own. The final part from trench warfare is the HMG complex, with the stuff you make it out of determining the sandbags that are placed beneath. The only value that matters here is the HP modifier. As such, you want something like elephant leather or heavy fur to buff the durability of the gun complex for a minimal additional cost. Given that it's a HMG, it's taking the LMG stats and buffing them across the board. Better damage, stopping power, penetration, burst count and range, with a faster aiming time but a slightly longer cooldown and some jiggled accuracy values that make it perform better at a middle distance, whereas an LMG is better for short and close range combat. This is going to need steel to rearm as well, making it more costly over time than using a handheld LMG, with every bullet fired by it taking a single steel, so you're looking at about 8 per burst. As you'd expect, this provides cover equal to a sandbag too, with 55% when manning the weapon working pretty nicely, and it's able to be buffed further with a trench. You only need 2 or 3 of these to easily hold down a choke point, whilst helping minimise the risk to the user. Onto the gun turret research. This is substantially more involved than base game, offering an additional 4 turrets and a single part of support infrastructure. With the base tech, you'll get the armoured turret and a searchlight. The armoured turret is a straight upgrade to your regular mini turret, making it provide better cover and upping its health for an additional cost of 50 steel. This gains even better value from using a sturdy material like uranium as the metal of choice when you're building it, making it near indestructible from small arms fire and the like. If you're using a mini turret and intending it to actually last, rather than play the part of a distraction or triggering enemies into combat, these should be your go-to. The searchlight will assist in defences by blinding the crap out of enemies. fitted with the same bulbs that BMW drivers use on narrow country lanes. This thing doesn't have especially long range, and whilst it isn't stunted by any means, enemies that are using rifles will likely be able to fire from outside of its effect. You probably want it operating within a kill box style of setup. This is going to lower the sight stat of enemies within it by 70%, making their accuracy absolutely pants, which helps to keep your own colonists that little bit safer. When paired with biofuel refining, you're also going to get the Flamer turret. This shoots an effect out that's very similar to the Impid's Flame Breath, capable of hitting multiple targets with a single shot. This needs 4 chem fuel per bath and it holds up to 20 shots in reserve. However, if you're using chem fuel expanded, this can be connected directly to your pipe network, meaning you can keep it fully stocked without ever needing to drag ammunition over to it. Obviously, the risk of using a turret like this is its very limited range, and heat armor is quite easy to stack with even mid-tier equipment. If you can find a way to tuck this out of the initial sightline of an enemy, around a corner or in its own little pocket, it can work quite nicely to keep some targets distracted while your colonists get to clear up any threats that are shrugging off the flame belch. When paired with gas operation, you will also unlock the shotgun turret and the military turret. The shotgun turret, as you would expect, is a close range punch. These work really well alongside your flamer turrets, keeping targets distracted and piling on the pressure with reasonably damaging shots that have a huge amount of stopping power, enough to make almost any enemy stop in their tracks. Their accuracy is far greater than a standard mini turret thanks to the close range proficiency, and they only take 2 steel per shot, making them pretty cost efficient. You just need to be careful when you are letting enemies get that close to your turrets. You don't want them to be destroyed repeatedly because of overwhelming odds. The military turret upgrades the damage potential of a mini turret, increasing the burst count, range and accuracy. So depending on the setup you're using, you could go the route of armoured turrets that are able to tank any shots that raiders get off, or lean into military turrets that try not to let raiders last long enough to return fire, via overwhelming damage. Just be aware that the additional shot on every burst is going to make these things chew through steel at a pretty rapid rate, especially if you're stacking a lot of them in a single area. You only need to pay an additional 20 steel and 2 components for this upgrade though, with them still being pretty quick to throw down in case of emergency. If you're using Vanilla Weapons Expanded non-lethal, you'll also get the non-lethal turret here too. It fires rubber bullets, so they do blunt damage rather than sharp, leading to increased odds of dropping a target in a safe manner compared to a standard turret. Of course, death on down chance is still going to be doing its thing in the background and making enemies die from wound accumulation rather than lethal damage at times, so it's never a guaranteed thing. These are great to keep around your prison doors though. It prevents breakouts from happening before they even really start. Just be aware that if you are going that route, you want to make them out of a sturdy material, as they're definitely going to take a punch or two before dealing enough damage to drop a rioter. From gun turrets, you'll then be able to research concealed defences, giving you access to a couple of parts that instantly remind me of SAM sites from the original Command & Conquer. The concealed barrier provides just a touch more cover and health than using a standard steel barricade, but it's 4 times the price and it needs 10 watts of power. These barriers can be raised and lowered with the press of a button, keeping pathways clear outside of combat and allowing colonists to rapidly deploy cover for the situation as needed. These can be great around primary doorways to your main base, giving you somewhere to fall back to that isn't going to interrupt movement during day-to-day activities, and it's not going to rely on you opening a door or potentially granting access to your facilities to use it. The concealed turret works just like the barriers, only it comes strapped with an improved mini turret, firing for equal damage, penetration and cooldown, but it's got a higher burst with slightly lower range. You need to be careful with these as they have a static material cost. You can't improve the health of the building in any way, so it's an especially fragile turret option that needs to make use of its concealment to keep it from being destroyed. Just be aware that there's a short cooldown between raising and lowering these structures as well, so if you plan to juggle enemies back and forth between concealed turrets, you need to leave ample space between them to cover the travel time and allow that cooldown to reset. Next we have Multibarrel Weapons, unlocking you the anti-air turret, minigun complex and minigun turret. Anti-air turrets are pretty expensive with a relatively short range, but they're going to be capable of intercepting drop pod raids as well as providing cover from things like mortar shells or rockets, with slower moving targets being easier for it to accurately hit and disable. They also have quite a hefty power cost, if you're going to use them in a quantity that provides cover to a large portion of your base anyway, so you might need to decide if you're going to saturate one section to ensure that it's adequately protected from any and all threats, or if you're going to cover your entire base from every angle, but risk letting the odd explosive slip through the net. The minigun turret and complex are largely the same stat-wise, with the main difference being that the turret is automated, so it needs power, and it's going to have a longer cooldown after firing, whereas the complex is going to rely on the shooting skill of the colonist that's manning it. The complex is also considerably cheaper to build, benefiting from your material choice similar to a HMG complex, and it can make use of that trench to keep its operator safe, whereas the turret needs to deal with its targets before it takes too many shots and explodes. As you'd expect, miniguns are going to burn through steel to keep them rearmed, so making use of an accurate shooter rather than going the route of saturation will help in keeping the cost of running these things down. Leaning on the complex is more efficient, but that's taking a colonist out of direct combat to man the weapon instead, whereas the turret will be able to support your soldiers and let them fire their own weapon at the same time. A lot of it comes down to what guns you're rocking, and if, for example, it makes more sense to man the minigun instead of firing a simple assault rifle. Then, with the autocannon research, you now have the double turret. This ups the burst to 6 rather than 3 at the cost of some range, a little bit of accuracy, and a far greater cooldown. This still has the same weakness as your standard autocannon, in that extremely close targets just avoid its fire, making that loss of range especially detrimental, as its active fire zone is even tighter. The previously mentioned minigun turret has a similar thing, but it's far closer to the actual turret, so it's a toss-up between a huge amount of DACA that can fire in close quarters, or more damaging shots that are capable of ripping an entire head off, but it needs to land those shots to keep threats at bay. Of course, pairing turrets together to support one another's weaknesses is a way to go, making sure that things like shotguns are able to punish any raiders that get close to your autocannons. Time for some really punchy turrets from pulse-charged munitions. If enemies are strapping on the armour, you want something to rip through it. Much like you have with multi-barrel weapons, you have a charged turret and a charged complex, so an automated and a manned option. The charged turret is pretty close to a standard charge rifle, firing with a burst of 4 for 14 damage at 25 range, so sacrifices a little bit of range and damage for the upside of packing an extra shot. This is the turret you definitely want to invest a sturdy material into when you're building it, as the base plasteel and advanced component cost is wasted if you're not reinforcing it with something like uranium or a plasteel shell to tank a hit or two. Whilst it's not excessively expensive to build, this is going to take plasteel to rearm after multiple shots, so consider the cost of upkeep before you cover your kill box with charge turrets and then have an absolute nightmare managing your materials going forwards. The charge complex uses a weapon similar to the charge blaster that centipedes come equipped with, splattering an area with inaccurate but deadly pulse charge projectiles. Again, another part that you really want to use a strong material for the base of, given that it's only 5 metal, wood or stone that's going to determine the health of the entire complex. Don't skimp on it. This thing is going to chew through plasteel. It barfs out 12 shots per burst and it holds a maximum of 10 full salvos. It can deplete that entire stockpile in under 1 minute, and it's going to take 60 plasteel to fully rearm. If you're planning on using trenches for cover and man complexes, this is about as good as it's going to get. It's just very pricey to use. Something that's a little confused on the workshop page and its actual in-game implementation now. The heavy Graser cannon states it comes in with biotech and uses ultramech tech. For me, it's paired with beam weapons, which is an Odyssey project, so this might depend what DLC you're using as to where it shows up for you. It's another emplacement that only needs 5 stuffable material to drastically improve its health, so again, don't skimp on it. This thing has a pretty damn lethal range, making up for the shortcoming of a handheld Graser. It still does suffer from the weird shot drawing mechanic of the weapon that often looks like it should have hit a target, but harmlessly passes over them, whilst hitting something else that's nowhere near to the actual beam. It gives me PTSD flashbacks of playing arena shooters on dial-up, although by the time we upgraded to broadband and I was still missing those shots, I just had to accept I was bad at FPS. This can be great for facing down overwhelming odds, but it's also weirdly inconsistent to an annoying degree at times. If you're easily frustrated by stuff like this, just maybe stick to using a charge complex. At least the missed shots on that make sense when they go wide. Another complex you'll get from a specific DLC is the Heavy Incinerator, which comes in with Anomaly's Bioferrite weapon tech. This thing has an insanely short range, consuming 6 bioferrite per flame belch, so you're going to end up using quite a few materials to pull the trigger, and the person manning it is going to be right in harm's way. However, this gives access to a reliable Hellcat rifle under barrel shot, up to 20 of them. The large flame bath effect can hold down a corridor from advancing melee nasties easily by itself, although if you stagger a couple of them, that's going to ensure no one gets remotely close to you. I see this as a portable infestation defense essentially. You build one, you pack it up, and you relocate it as required to establish your own holdout spot when facing down a horde of insects. Let's move up to some really expensive tech now, with 3 projects from the tippy top of the tree. Combining pulse charge munitions and the uranium slug turret will give you access to railguns. This thing fires on a burst of 3 for 50 damage per shot, with 45% armor penetration. So whilst it doesn't pack quite as much shred as the uranium slugger, a single shot going wide isn't wasting what is essentially the entire attack. This thing can afford to miss once in a while as it still has a couple more rounds in reserve. As you'd expect, high cooldown, huge range, and its accuracy is best suited for targets at the edge of that field. As with all the charged weapons we've looked at in this video, if you're going to use a railgun, make sure you have a heavy stockpile of plasteel ready to keep it rearmed. It'll chug through it at a pretty steady pace. If you want a more specialised turret, you can research Electromagnetic Pulse after wrapping up the Autocannon and Pulse Charge munition tech to get your hands on the Tesla Blaster. This is only going to target mechanoids and it deals no direct damage. Thankfully, there's no upkeep, outside of its power consumption anyway, so once this thing is built, you don't need to sweat refueling it. It fires a bouncing electrical charge that will stun advancing mechanoids and hold them in place for a few seconds, giving your other turrets more time to do their thing. As with all EMP effects that are used on mechanoids, they're going to adapt to it after a hit and be immune to that stun effect for a small duration, stopping you from just chain stunning them indefinitely. All you ever really need is one of these things, as shots bounce enough times to hit any relevant targets in terms of range. Doubling up on that jolt isn't going to somehow override the stun immunity. That just leaves us with Repulsor tech. This needs fabrication and shields research to unlock. You have 2 variants with this, a small repulsor, like turning up to a first date wearing a Hawaiian shirt and a fedora, and a large repulsor, like opening the conversation by saying you listen exclusively to Manosphere podcasts. Both of these are pretty costly in terms of advanced components, but not so overpriced that you're unlikely to ever make use of one of them. They both behave in the same way. They're going to activate when a threat is present on the map, increasing their power consumption to provide an energy field that blocks incoming projectiles, both low, like gunshots, and high, like mortars. You're going to want a bank of batteries charged and ready to go if you plan on using repulsors, as these burn through energy pretty damn quickly, with constantly floating their power consumption being fairly costly to do. These fulfill different purposes based on their size. It's not quite as simple as bigger is better. The small repulsor covers a modest area, but it has a higher maximum energy, as well as a faster recharge and a lower power consumption. This seems intended to be used on your front line, keeping your fighters safe as it's capable of taking an absolute battering, whilst not covering such a large area that it gets hit by absolutely everything and is immediately overwhelmed. The large repulsor, however, covers a huge area, but has a lower maximum energy, a slower recharge and a higher consumption. Whilst this is still going to protect from standard shots, you don't really want all the enemies mag dumping into it from every angle, as it's going to be rapidly overwhelmed. This is better to keep a large area protected from mortar fire, as it can more easily withstand the continued battering of siege projectiles, and it helps to mitigate against those that sail off course. Alternatively, this can work to separate the threat of an enemy force, keeping those with a long range weapon from being able to fire in, while still letting close range enemies pass through its barrier, so they aren't piling their damage into its shield, but it's going to allow your colonists to bring them down without the threat of supporting fire. Both of the repulsors aren't perfect. If they take a rapid amount of damage in a short space of time, it can cause the unit to overheat and let out a fiery burst in the surrounding area. Not great if you're stood right next to it, so you want to make sure that your own colonists have a little bit of distance between themselves and the device. These shields do work over walls, so it's not a bad idea to put one between the shield itself and your colonists. That's going to allow them to stand there without the risk of being exploded. And there we have it. A flexible, practical expansion to your security options. Nothing overtly overpowered, whilst not flooding the security tab with multiple versions of what amounts to the same thing. Everything has a place, a purpose, and a use case. Mountain base with tight corridors and a thin entrance, shotguns and fire. Wide open field that your enemies are going to need to cross to reach you. Trenches, spotlights, razor wire, minigun complexes. A tech-locked run that makes no use of electricity? No worries, you can still use catapults and rain death on the enemy. It's a nice easy addition that slots seamlessly into your setup without overcomplicating anything, which is just the way I like my mods. If you'd like to see what I'm working on and get insights into upcoming projects, it's all available to view on my Patreon page. All the posts there are free to read, but if you'd like, you can support me in producing content like this for just £1 a month. It gets your name in the credits and it helps me to stay alive. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon or evening. Stay safe and take care.
It's been a good